Hello and welcome to week 3. In this first video, we'll begin by covering how to work with text in processing, including how to import your own fonts into your sketches. Then I'll go over creating custom variables and how to set their initial values. We'll be working directly in the processing environment, so as we cover new theory and concepts, their output will be demonstrated in real time in the output window. So, let's get started working with text and variables.
Okay, so here we are in processing, and I've set up a new sketch to begin working with text and variables. I've done a little bit of the setup information by putting the size of the canvas set to 800 by 600, and I set up the background to be black, which is the pound sign and 6 zeros. So let's take a look at our canvas here. Okay, so our canvas is all set up. So to work with text in processing, you're going to be working with the text function. And the text function takes 3 arguments. So I will type text, all lowercase, and then open up my parentheses for the argument. The first argument is a string, and a string is a series of characters which is rendered as text to be read. And in this case, the string is going to say, hello world. When you're writing your string, you're going to put it inside of double quotes. When you finish your string, complete the double quotes, and then a comma to separate your arguments. The next 2 values are going to be the location of x and y for the text to be rendered. In this case, I'd like to put the text in the center of the screen. Now, because the size of our canvas is set up as 800 by 600, I could easily do the math in my head and say to put this at 400 and 300 to put it at the center of the screen. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we have that at the center of the screen, but what you might notice is that it's not quite dead center. Instead, it looks like they use the center line and then the text is originating from the left outwards. So what do you do if you want to center your text? Well, there's a text modifier function called text align. That's lowercase t, uppercase a. That's the camel case situation here. So you'll type that, open your argument, and then you can choose to type left, or you can choose to type center, or right. And those are all caps, those arguments there. So I'm going to type center, close this, and add my semicolon, and then let's see if this text is centered. Very good. It appears that our text is now centered there. Now, something else I wanted to show you is, what if your resolution wasn't as easy to figure out dead center as 800 by 600? Well, instead of typing the values 400 and 300, we can use the stored variables that are automatically generated for the screen that are called width and height. When you're working with variables, you can use mathematic calculations with those variables. So what I can do is I can find the center of the width by doing width divided by 2 and height divided by 2, and this will tell the program to figure out the half of width and half of height, and that will place it right at the center. So let's see if that works here. Very good. So it looks identical, and this would be great if we had a very odd resolution or if we had a project that constantly changed resolutions. This allows our center to be adaptable for different circumstances. Now, there are a few more text modifications that I'd like to show you. Next is text size. That's lowercase text, uppercase s on size. And this allows you to dictate the point size for your text. So if I say 32, inside here, it's going to change this to a 32 point size font. Very good, and I can change this. I'm going to do a little bigger. Let's try 48. Okay, that looks great. Next we have the fill. Fill you should be familiar with. Fill allows you to change the color of the text. We were using that previously with our shapes. Now fill takes a color argument, and I would like to use a bright yellow. So I'm going to grab the tool color selector, choose my bright yellow up here, highlight the hex code, copy it, and paste it inside the fill here. I'll close my color selector, close this off with a semicolon, and then press play. Very good. So we've changed the color of our font, changed the alignment, we changed the text size, and we've placed the text of our font. Now, the last thing that we could change is the font. But because changing the font is a little bit complicated and involves declaring a new variable, first I'm going to talk about how to work with variables in processing. Now we'll take a short break to see how things are going with a brief quiz. So we've worked with variables before, and I introduced variables at the very beginning of this class. And we talked about ints, we talked about floats, we talked about strings, and we talked about a few others. But I'm going to show you how to work with them here. When you're first working with a variable, first you're going to type in the type of variable that you want to work with. So if you want to create an integer variable, you're first going to type int. Then you're going to give the variable a name. In this case, I'm going to give this temporary variable the name I for integer. So I could close this here, and I've just created the variable integer I. If I press stop and run, let's see what happens. Nothing, right? Because at this point, all we've done is declare the existence of I. We haven't given I a value, and we haven't used I in our sketch at all. So I could give I a value by going onto a new line and saying I equals 50. Closing it off. We'll press run. And again, nothing's happened because nothing has changed. So what happens if I erase this string of text right here and simply type the letter I? Now our variable should be put into play, and it will be called upon, and when it calls upon I, it will replace I with the contents of I, which are currently set to 50. Let's see what that looks like here. Bingo. There we go. So what we've done is we've created a variable that's an integer. We've taken our variable and we've given it a starting value, and then we've used it in rendering our text. Now I'm going to take these two lines and I'm going to simplify them, because what you can do in processing is you can declare and define your variable all in one line. So I'm going to type int, I'm going to give my variable a name I, and then instead of closing it with a semicolon, I'm going to go ahead and say equals, and then 50, and then close it off. So there I've combined two lines of code into one. So that's integer I equals 50. So if we press play, we should get the same results, 50 onto the screen. Now when you're working with text, you can use text string combined with variables. And to do that, you would say, put your string in quotes, and I'll type the output is, and then end. And then I'm going to put a plus sign. So what this is telling the compiler is when you render the text, use this string, but then also immediately add whatever the contents of I are. So in this case, I could use this as a way to debug my code and figure out what the current state of different variables are. So now, when I press play, it should read, the output is 50. Great. This is very good. Now, let's try the same thing with a float. So declaring a float is exactly the same as declaring an integer, but floats are a little bit different in that they are floating point values with decimal point accessibility. So if I type float, call my float f, equals 4.29, close this off, and then I'll change this I down here to an f, and you'll see how the float is used in our program output. Okay, so now it says the output is 4.29. Great, this is working very well. And last, let me show you how to create a string. So if I type string, oh wait a second, something that's very important is that string is a little different in that when you declare it, you must use an uppercase when you type string. So there you see that when I use the lowercase, it didn't turn orange, but when I use a capital S, it turned orange. That's a great sign. So I'm going to call my string HW equals, and then here in quotes, I'm going to type hello world. Close my quotes, end with the semicolon. Now when I go down here, I'm going to clear this out. Simply type HW, and when the compiler reads HW, it will instead substitute this string here, hello world. So I'll press stop and play. Excellent. There is our hello world. Now we'll take a short break to see how things are going with a brief quiz. Now, the last thing that I want to cover in this video is how to change the text font. Now, changing text font is a little tricky and involves a few lines of code in creating a new variable called a pfont. So let me walk through that process briefly, and then you'll know how to change fonts in the future for any projects that you work on. So one of the first things that you'll want to do is to save your sketch, because fonts involves using external font data. So I'm going to save the sketch as it currently is into my desktop folder. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. I'm going to choose my desktop and press Save. And in processing, when you save a file, processing will always create a folder to put your file inside of the same name. You should always leave the folder name the same as the file name, or processing will have some confusion. I'm going to leave this open just to demonstrate what happens next. So, to add a different font to your sketch, you're going to need to use a tool from the Tools menu called Create Font. So I'm going to go to Tools, select Create Font. From here, you're going to want to search for the font that you're interested in using. Now, I'd like to use a very common font, Georgia. So I'm going to scroll down to Georgia and select Georgia. It's going to ask what type of size I like and if I want smoothing. This all looks good. Now for the file name, I'm just going to call this all one word lowercase Georgia and select OK. And then watch what happens when we hit OK in this folder area here. OK. So what you see is that a new folder has been added to our sketch folder, and that's the data folder. The data folder is used in processing to use any external data that will go into your sketch. You can use this folder to call upon external files, and you can place any external files into this folder and use them in your sketch. Okay, so back to our sketch. I'm going to show you how to create the pfont variable, which will store our font and load in the external font. So this is pfont and loading external font. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to declare your font variable. So I'm going to type pfont, that's capital P and capital F, and I'm going to call this font Georgia. Now to load it as the external, I'm going to use a function as the definition. So that function is load font, lowercase l, capital F, and the argument that it takes is the name of the file. So this is going to be georgia.vlw. Close this, close this. Okay, so we've created a variable of type pfont, and we've filled that variable with the contents of this external file, and that's our font. Now, in order to set our font, we go down to where we work with our text, and we use the function text font, lowercase t, capital F, and then we simply type in Georgia. Close this, and now let's take a look at our Georgia font. So this was the default font, which is a serif font, and here is our Georgia font. Excellent, excellent. And of course, we could resume this back to default and look back at the two simply by commenting out these lines, pressing stop, and then play. Okay, so that is our old font, and then I will uncomment these out to resume the use of the Georgia font. Excellent. Okay, so in this video, I've shown you how to work with text. I've shown you how to draw text on the screen and place it anywhere you like on the screen, how to align your text, change the size, change the color, and then I showed you how to work with variables, working with integers, giving them a name, working with floats and strings. And one thing that I want to let you know is that variables must be one word. You can't have spaces in the names of your variables. They must start with a letter and not a number or a symbol. And they must start with a lowercase letter because uppercases are reserved for the classes. Also, no special characters are allowed in variables, except for underscores. Also, it's good practice to use camel case, so that your variables, if they are compound words, the first word will start with a lowercase letter, and your second word and your compound word will start with an uppercase letter. So, after I showed you how to work with variables, I showed you how to load in your own font with the unique to processing p font variable.